Good afternoon, traders. This is Christian from Tribeca Trade Group, and it is Monday, April 27th. This is your end of day recap. Before we get into some big earnings reports, some really nice price action today. We had the S&P up 1.3% today. We had the Qs finish up. They underperformed for the day. They were only up 80 basis points, but the real star performer was the small caps ETF that was up 4% for the day. So real nice outperformance in this, and looking just ahead where this kind of got to for the day. We got up to 127. Could be that we're headed up to about 130 and a half. So the small cap ETF. But I thought it was really interesting to see the small caps finally outperform a bit. This was something that we talked about, or I had talked about the last couple weeks as a possibility of happening. However, I did not get a trade on in this one because it's one of these things where it's been going sideways for the last couple weeks and didn't really know which way this one was going to break. I don't have my spreadsheet up for the overall performance for the day, but you can see right here, this is where we were about 2, 3 o'clock today, and yeah, I mean a couple of the observations here were the small caps, also the mid caps and the micro caps were up about just the same. Bonds were down for the day, so I saw a couple of comments about everything being up last week or the last couple weeks. Could bonds, gold, and equities rally? Well, it looks like kind of answered the question here for just for the one day. We're seeing equities outperform and really gold underperformed, and bonds as well, which I think actually finished lower than that. So we've been talking about how bonds have been pretty neutral, just to kind of touch upon them quickly, but they've been neutral to kind of looking like so number one, they've lost the momentum from what they had from weeks ago. So it just looks like there hasn't been much of a trade there, even though we've been seeing a little bit of call activity in the bond space. But it just looks like it cannot turn the corner and just doesn't have the same momentum to it that it had weeks ago. Gold, we'll kind of just touch upon gold because I still see a lot of people talking about gold. Just didn't have the momentum today. Finished off the lows, but still down for the day, so not much of a trade there for the day. So again, the price action was fast to kind of start the where futures opened up last night. It was one of those situations where you had to have some trades in place, I think, going into today. Other than that, you had to chase, which I think is always difficult on a Monday. So like in terms of like P&L and performance, I actually had better days last. I was up for the day, fine P&L, but I had better days last week when we were basically flat. And so I think always a little bit difficult, right? These moves, depending on if you're a day trader versus a swing trader, and carry risk overnight, because again, over time the majority of the moves happen in the overnight session versus the during the cash market, right, between 9:30 and 4 o'clock, and that proved itself today. And I think we've been starting to see that normalize a little bit, where we saw for the month of I want to say like half of March and half of this month, we've been seeing a lot of really nice volatile moves during the daytime, but we're starting to see more of that move go back to the overnight session, which again is nothing new. That's been happening for years and years. Is that the overnight moves are greater than the intraday moves. So could be that we're moving that way, but yeah, I thought again with the small caps, because you're going to hear about the outperformance over and over today. Great if you caught it. Again, we had just detailed just detailed a trade idea, talking about possibly a call spread, saying, hey, maybe it is the next group to kind of catch. The other thing with these rotations, you just kind of have to have a little bit of common sense, and think about things. Maybe maybe a little bit of common sense, and maybe to think a little bit about this intuitively. There's been a lot of hiding places where people have gone into. That's mainly healthcare, biotech. I think healthcare is a combination of things. It's defensive. Plus, sorry to talk politically, but Bernie Sanders not in this anymore, in the election running anymore. It means that they're not going to roll out some major, universal. There's no chance of that now. right? There's obviously we don't know who's going to win the election come fall, but we know that Bernie's not going to win, and that's also one of the reasons why I think biotech and healthcare names, other than the catalyst of the COVID being in place there too. But really, that's been the outperformance. But we know what happens from time to time, and this is something that I've been talking about for the last week or so. That we're probably at some point going to see a rotation here. And again, everybody talking about the FANG stocks last week, and oh, the FANG stocks are the only things that are moving. Well, first of all, the people who are doing that aren't doing the research, because we know that biotech and healthcare have been the leaders. But there has been some relative outperformance in names like Amazon and so forth. But we've talked about this in terms of while the country is shut down, the haves and the have-nots. Well, you have to think about it and take another step forward. If the country starts to reopen, we're going to see a rotation out of some of those overcrowded tech software type plays where that have been doing very well because everybody's on the internet and at home more often than they are going out. So if the country starts to reopen, you can expect, I would think, a little bit more of the same as well. So there's some news about Boeing that just hit the tape to resume 787 operations. So not that big of news, but that is out there. But so yeah, you kind of have to think about that, and realize some names that have been a little bit out of favor. And we're seeing some hints along the way. We saw a big Las Vegas Sands call buyer after post earnings last week. The stock was up 5%, and it looks like it finished well off the highs today. So again, one of those areas where just looking at how this name closed and how some other names closed today, you have to be also kind of think about things in terms of not being too greedy. Because I think the stock was up around 8 or 9% earlier. So some of these names, right, that that they're still not open yet, but are catching a boost because of headlines and so forth. If you could catch a big winner like this, and if you went long some calls because you saw that big call buyer on Friday, then congratulations to you. Some other observations for the day, or I'll talk a little bit about. But yeah, the banks were the big story today. Again, needing, I think, to kind of get going. Do I think this could be a multi-day rally for the banks? I don't have anything on in this space, so that should tell you for what I think. But again, I think overall, even though I didn't participate in a lot of these groups that have been underperforming, like the banks, I think it's still really good health for the overall market. Right? We don't want to see only a few groups kind of pull the cart in terms of leading out performance. We do, I think, want to see some groups, rotate a little bit, even if it is just a 1 day rotation. That's my guess. Is probably that we're seeing, a couple things like this. I mean, this happened for a couple days back here too. So again, a lot of these groups that we're seeing are still in value. And I look to buy some of those weaker names. Like if you think Microsoft, for example, and Amazon are going to run into earnings, which they already have. We've talked about that with Netflix. Like something like this, buying, Microsoft on a down day, because I still think that they're going to do better. And Amazon, down 1.4% on the day, headed into earnings, putting in some type of a bull flag right now. So again, that's the way I'm kind of leaning. But I think overall, what I've been talking about and what I talked about in the weekend video is, don't put all your eggs in one basket, essentially, because, we will see rotations from time to time. Even though this name overall still pretty good performance for the Qs and for SPY today. So nothing really to no damage done in that group. By the way, everything that we're going over, because I don't have my spreadsheet with the risk disclaimer, is for information purposes only, not giving out any advice or recommendations. So what did I trade today? Well, I just saw I'm still seeing more setups and growth names, even though we've talked about how value needed to catch up a little bit. CTXS, that was a name that I added into weakness last week. Again, I think this is going to also be an opportunity for us during earnings season, right? CTSX kind of ran up, and could be the same thing with, we don't know how, obviously we don't know how Amazon is going to turn out, but this name not exactly the same looking chart, but this is what happened on earnings day. The thing went all the way down to 140. That was a great little trade to kind of buy weakness, and listening to their quarter, it sounded like they had a great quarter. They just ran up into earnings too much. So you kind of have to think about that with some of these names that are going to be reporting this week. So Amazon, I will probably structure a trade around Amazon once we get to that day for earnings. But you have to realize, like, in terms of how much you want to risk, well, it's already made its move, right? We talked about what we did last week in Netflix, where we sold premium, right? Netflix still isn't moving and digesting. And again, that's perfectly normal. After a few big days of momentum and a breakout, this is probably setting up for the next move. You just have to be patient, right? And because if you look at this weekly chart in Netflix, but again, just using Netflix as an example, be cognizant of what the path is for some of these names going into. Yeah, sure enough, it's still holding way above value, so still looks good, I think. But just doing its thing right now in terms of digestion. Zscaler, which I always like here, here's one of the things that I talk about a lot. In terms of preparation going into the week and just preparation that we do on a nightly basis when the market is closed. We're looking for names that are looking pretty good technically, right? That have what's known as a pretty thin value area for the week, that are making a move out of a range, out of digestion. Names that have pulled back a little bit into support that are in uptrends. So that's kind of what I like to look for. And a lot of times what we see, like if we go into something that I had talked about here, is that you can get into some of these names before the momentum option activity takes place. Right? This is a big concept, and I think it gets lost on the Twitter sphere. I like to get in. My goal is to get into names before there's option activity. I think a lot of traders, what they like to do is they like to wait. They like to see, oh, where are they buying things, and then I'm going to go ahead and buy into a name. The problem with that is a lot of times it's just momentum call activity like this. They were buying Zscaler weekly calls when the name's already up, 2.5% on the day, 3% on the day. Now again, we got into this one right off the bat, so this was perfect. But do I want to buy names that are already up 4% because there's a momentum call buyer on the tape? No, I want to already be in there. So that's kind of the goal, and it also, I mean, sometimes when I do see option activity, and the goal is to do the research so that you're familiar with the names, because a lot of times these names are moving so quickly. So again, that's the point of doing the research, to get into some of these areas before those momentum, because again, a lot of these things, they're just basically algos, that are basically seeing a name up 2%, and they're seeing that there's momentum in the name, and they're buying. There's not anything magical that some of these, some of the call activity is doing here. Lulu, this was a name that we mentioned on Twitter. I said it was one of my favorite setups going into the week. I think Lulu has more to go. I did take off this trade because I was just happy with what it did. And again, I'm still not being super greedy in this tape, but I think it could get up to 238. 238 is also a level that if you look over at the weekly chart, or excuse me, the daily chart, you're going to see that 243 also lines up with an area that this could possibly get to. So again, I like when we look at charts on multiple time frames and there's a volume area where this could possibly get up to. So that'll be a name that I'm watching for tomorrow again. But same thing in this one. They were buying calls, once there was a little bit of momentum in this. Again, so not scientific what these call buyers are doing. They're basically just chasing momentum. Another name that we got into before there was calls on the tape today. All right, so again, that's my job. A couple other trades, I bailed on this one. ATVI was a setup that I also put on Twitter. Not every trade is going to work. I decided that this one didn't have momentum, and again, I'm also a little bit concerned about that rotation. Right, this has been one of those names that's done very well while everybody's staying at home. If they start to open up the country, what do you think's going to happen there? I did also trade a little bit of Microsoft, and I'm holding half the order and I'm going to be looking for a move into earnings. So we'll see how that goes. Again, I want to have a little bit of exposure in names that I think have a possibility to run into earnings. Right? Look at this name, for example. This was a name that was on our watch list, our weekend watch list. This is Zebra Technologies, up 5.9% before it reports earnings. So I did put on a small trade for this one, but when you would rather play the move into earnings here, and then you don't even have to worry about the earnings event, right? Because the name was up 12. It was up $12 today. So again, that's kind of what I'm looking for. Is we will structure a couple names. Is definitely this week for earnings, but a lot of times names will make the move before earnings, and you don't have to even deal with the event, or they might be buying opportunities after they report earnings. All right, so that's a little bit of our plan for the week. But all in all, great day, and nice to see outperformance coming from the small caps. Which, if you look at some of these relationships that I have, and I've put them on Twitter between value and growth, I don't think was sustainable to see value underperform so much. So it's great to see a little bit of a catch up trade in some of those underperforming areas. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow. Again, big week to go through for this week. So a lot of events and a lot of action to come further on in the week. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow.